Welcome to Celluloid Citizens, a podcast about film. I'm Sean M. Thompson.
And I'm Brian O'Connell.
And on this week's episode, we're going to be discussing The Killing of a Sacred Deer, put out by A24, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, written by Yorgos Lanthimos and Efthimis Philippou, and starring Nicole Kidman and Colin Farrell and others.
It's an interesting film.
Interesting is definitely a word.
There's a lot of... This is a very... easily one of the stranger things I have seen in a theater, and I'm kind of surprised it got as wide a release as it did. But it's by one of my favorite directors, Yorgos Lanthimos, who has done two other movies I love, The Lobster and The Favorite. In many ways very similar, but also quite different from this film. I think this film is perhaps the most esoteric of those three, and I haven't seen his earlier films.
Which is definitely a bold statement, considering he doesn't make normal films.
No, he does not. These are very... The word I would use to describe them, and I wouldn't necessarily assign a particular, thematic philosophy to them or anything, but stylistically, I would describe them as absurdist films, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I consider myself an absurdist, and I think all of the films I've seen of his, The Lobster, Killing of a Sacred Deer, and The Favorite, all have absurdist elements.
Yeah.
Which is essentially, life is absurd and death is absurd.
Yeah, but it isn't just thematically. I think the style of the films and the acting and even the cinematography has this very... let it be said that this film is hard to classify in a particular genre, but if I had to come down on it, I would describe it as a low-key horror film or a thriller.
Yeah, I would say...
probably horror.
Not necessarily psychological horror, because that would imply a range of human emotions, which we'll get into, but... clearly very stilted with that. I would say maybe not even necessarily, I was going to say quiet supernatural horror, but it's not all that quiet.
It's very... I think we should probably just delve into describing the plot and the style, but we always discuss spoilers and we always have to put a spoiler warning, but this is a film... Right,
so big spoiler warning. This one's definitely... You don't want it to be spoiled if you haven't seen it. Although I would argue it is a film that I watched it again and I knew the ending and I still managed to enjoy it.
Oh yeah. Well, the fatalism.
But a first time watch, you don't want to know what's happening.
Yeah. And it sets right off the bat kind of subverting expectations or pushing the limit with the first shot is a shot of actual open heart surgery.
Open heart surgery at length. This is one of the few times this episode I just finished watching this film for a second time less than an hour ago, which I almost never do. So I can tell you, I was trying to eat a turkey sandwich and I forgot and the film started. And I was just like, I had to cover my eyes and ask my girlfriend, is it still going? She's like, yeah, it's still going.
It's quite shocking and a very striking image to open the film on. And it has this very almost exaggeratedly melancholy choral music over it that's setting this very doomy tone. And it inspires body horror.
And it is just held too. It's it's probably 3 minutes?
At least a full minute, I would say. That's how long it felt to me. And that feels like an eternity.
And it does feel like an eternity in film because you're getting everything in 30-second to minute long.
It's a very unsparing shot. And this isn't really gory, although there are a few upsetting moments of bloodshed. It is one of the few moments of actual gore in the film, but the emotional shock of seeing that, I think, sets the tone for the kind of sadistic situation these characters are put in. I've heard people describe his films as heartless. I don't know if I would totally subscribe to that, but if there is one that is ironically heartless, it is probably this one, because
The one that starts with open heart surgery, yes.
yeah, it's almost against.
I don't know if I would say his films are heartless. I would say that they're very exacting in their technique and that they play with human emotions in a way that most people don't bother to do with their films.
Absolutely.
Like most people, you're starting with a realist narrative, and even if it's an absurdist narrative, everyone's speaking with like regular human inflection, like regular emotional pathos.
Yeah.
I would say someone like Yorgos is similar to David Lynch, where they realize that like even dialogue, even the human voice is an integral part of the film, and you can manipulate that in such a way that it brings about a certain emotion in the audience.
Yeah, this is a director who is using extreme artificiality to tell a more emotional or psychological story than an actual like realist one. But I mean, the most notable example of that is in the acting, which I think the performances.
Yes, the acting is very stilted is the word.
Stilted. It's so, I mean, and I think, don't get me wrong, I think the actors are very, very good in this film.
They do a good job. When we say stilted, we don't mean that they have a bad performance. We mean that the direction for them was, it seemed like it was something along the lines of, like, be very flat and don't really react to anything, no matter how, like, everything is the same reaction. It's like someone getting a watch is the same reaction as Colin Farrell, and this is a big spoiler, telling his son that he wants jacked off his dad.
Which, it's, I mean, like, the opening scene where the two, Colin Farrell is walking with another, and with an anesthesiologist, down the hallway, and they're just talking about watches. It's a very normal conversation, I guess, but just the way it's spoken, like every exchange in this.
Yeah, I'll do my best to impersonate it, something along the lines of like, that is a nice watch. Where did you get it? I got it 10 years ago. Oh, I noticed you have a metal strap instead of a leather strap. Yes, I prefer that. You know, it's just this very like
unnatural.
Why are you talking like this?
Yeah, and that's what, like, it is an unsettling affect in many ways, and it makes even the most mundane scenes feel very, like, strange and unearthly. But it also...
Yeah, there's this weird quality to the film. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Where it's like, there are scenes that are so tense, and it's just... and I forget the child actor's name. I think he goes by...
Sonny Soljic.
His name's Steven, right?
Who's the character?
The character.
Of the teenager.
The teenager, yes.
Oh, that's...
Did we ever learn his name?
Martin.
Oh, sorry. Martin. I think Steven was his dad. A scene as simple as Martin eating spaghetti and talking about how his dad used to eat spaghetti the same way is as tense as Colin Farrell, like, with this same kid tied to a chair punching him. Because everything has the same weird emotional... There's a weird emotional weight because nothing has an emotional weight. I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, it's very...
It's just tense. It's like...
It's tense, it is. But I also find it frequently very funny. And I would say that the other side of this it is a horror film, and it is actually, in my experience, one of the more disturbing horror films personally for me that I've seen. But it is also the same affect can be very humorous in its own way. And right, depending on the scene, it can be very funny. Well, that scene you mentioned earlier where for no reason Colin Farrell starts describing having masturbated his father as a teenager, it comes out of nowhere. I mean, ostensibly the reason is he wants to tell, it's like, he wants truth or dare type thing. He's like, I'm going to tell my son this really horrible thing so my son will admit that maybe he's and we'll get into it, but maybe he's faking this whole illness where he's like paralyzed and can't eat. Yeah. And he just goes off and tells this extremely like upsetting story, but it's very like in another film that would be like a pivotal character moment and that would be what we go back to. Yeah. In this film it's just tossed out and never mentioned again. Yeah. It extends to other scenes. There's the scene where he just mentions that his daughter started menstruating to a colleague.
Right, and it's out of nowhere. They're at like a doctor party, or he's there receiving an award or something.
And they're just having this banal conversation, and then he's like, "Oh yeah, my daughter."
Yeah, it's like, "Oh, do you like that cocktail? It's a very good cocktail. I stopped drinking." And then he's like, "My daughter started menstruating for the first time." And everyone reacts
normally
with as if he was talking about, "Oh, I don't drink anymore."
Yeah. I mean, and another one is when they're eating dinner, and it just Nicole Kidman says, "We all have lovely hair," and it's really unnatural. And I mean, I feel like the first time I watched this, by the end, I was literally wincing in my seat because it gets very suspenseful, particularly in the last 15 minutes. But this time I appreciated the humor in it more, and I just find the weird blank expressions they all constantly have just it's both disconcerting and very, very funny at the same time. I really...
It's very funny and disconcerting. I don't have an official thing to cite from, but I've read that the human mind is actually... People are more disturbed by someone without an expression than someone with an angry expression or a sad expression. Because, even if it's like the most angry person...
Sense.
You know this person is angry and you know how to react. But if it's someone with a very flat voice with no expression, you don't know how to react. You're like, is this good? Is this bad? What?
That makes a lot of sense. And getting into the more specific nature of the plot, this is, accordingly with that idea, this is a film that wants you to be unsure about how to feel.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And second time around, I still don't really know how to feel about a lot of it.
Yeah, it's very...
Like, Colin Farrell's character isn't exactly a hero.
No.
He's, a former alcoholic who apparently botched a heart surgery.
Yeah.
Because he was drinking, I should say.
It's very... the situation he is in is like, as soon as that steak was set up, I was like, this is gonna be really fucked up, and it is, because, well, we'll just describe...
Yeah, it might be easier at this point to just go into the actual plot. Colin Farrell's character, who, of course, I don't have the name in front of me.
Steven.
Is he Steven?
I think he is Steven.
Okay, good. All right. So Colin Farrell's character of Steven, we begin the film, he's just finished performing surgery, and he meets with Martin, and you don't really know why they hang out. You just assume it's like a mentor kind of a thing, or maybe it's a friend of the family, and they...
It's very ambiguous because, and I was watching it with my brother the second time today, and he assumed there was something inappropriate about their relationship because he's giving him presents, and there's just a general
Yeah, it's open-ended. He gives him a watch. He's walking by the pier, smoking a cigarette with him. I think he got the kid an ice cream.
Yeah, it's clearly not a normal exactly arrangement, but we don't exactly know what the nature of it is. Definitely not exactly at the start of the film.
No, but as we go, we are introduced to Steven's family. Nicole Kidman, who plays his wife, whose name, I'm sorry, I don't have in front of me.
Anna,
okay. And he has...
The names aren't used very frequently, at any rate.
And he has a daughter who I think is probably 15. I think she says she's 15 at one point.
Yeah,
and then a son who's probably 11 or 12.
Yeah, sounds about right.
And everyone's very stilted.
They live in this beautiful neighborhood.
Sitting at the dinner table talking about their hair.
It's very strange. And I don't know exactly what the thematic intent of the film is, and we'll discuss that a little later. But they live in this very bougie, upper-class suburban neighborhood. They have a lovely house.
For most people, you would think of as an idealized neighborhood, nice big house and nice quiet suburb with nice trees and furniture and all that.
They have a dog. Their kids are musical. It's very a nuclear family-esque, although obviously subverted by this weird affect they all have. But we eventually learn that Stephen, while drunk during an opera, while performing surgery, botched the operation that would have saved Martin's father's life. and that he's kind of hanging around Martin, I guess out of some sort of sense of guilt.
It's sort of over residual guilt. I also got the sense it was sort of blackmail.
Yeah, a little bit.
Like, they never explicitly say it, but I got the sense that maybe they kind of obviously falsified the medical records because they didn't mention he was drunk, and that's why he screwed up the surgery.
Yeah. He's out of some sort of sense of responsibility or guilt or criminality. He's just watching over Martin. And at first, they seem to be relatively fine, but it goes wrong when Martin invites Stephen to his mother's house, and his mother makes extremely weird, flirtatious advances on him.
She talks about his hands, and then she starts kissing his hands and sucking his thumb. And there's a really great line she has when he gets disturbed, and he's like, I gotta go. She's like, you must have I will not let you leave until you've had my tart.
It's
just like another very absurdist, like, she's trying to cheat with this guy, and he's like, no. And she's like, well, at least have dessert.
Yeah.
But it's not even like that comedic. It's like so much flatter than how I say it.
Yeah. It's very like...
played by the way, Alicia Silverstone, who I've really loved lately. Her career has seemed to consist of like shorter roles in indie horror films. She was in The Lodge, too. In the very beginning of The Lodge. Yes, I'd love to cover that at some point, too, but she does a great job in that. But it's a similar, like, very damaged, broken woman who sort of is a pivotal element in, like, the tragedy of the horror film.
Yeah. I haven't seen The Lodge yet. I really want to. But certainly...
I saw it in the theater. It was great.
Oh, yeah. It's on Hulu now, right? I'll check it out at some point.
I'm not sure, but yeah, I would highly recommend it. But anyway, so yeah.
So Martin takes this rejection of his mother's advances badly. You get the sense that he kind of wanted Colin Farrell to go with his mom. So then literally about an hour in, the plot really starts to kick into gear.
And it's funny because I forgot it too. It's so tense that you just think, I thought this on the first watch. Oh, it's just going to be like a cat and mouse thing where this kid is like a stalker.
Yeah, no.
And he's just bothering Colin Farrell and his family. And then, yeah, once we're an hour in, Stephen's son, he's like, I can't feel my legs. And they take him to the hospital. And that's when it's revealed that, or shortly after that there's sort of a supernatural thing going on. And if Stephen doesn't pick one of his family to kill, they're all going to die eventually.
And he outlines this in 3 steps, which I find, I don't know, the weird specificity of it made it somehow more unsettling. He's like, first...
Yeah, and I thought at first, because I read this time it was based on a play by Euripides, Iphigenia in Aulis.
Yeah, partially.
Which I don't know anything about, but I thought like, oh, okay, so this is probably from the play. But no, that's not from the play.
He says their legs will stop functioning and they'll be paralyzed from the waist down. That then they will start to refuse food to the point of starvation. And finally, they will bleed from their eyes, and a few hours after that starts, they will die. And that this will happen to all of Stephen's family if he doesn't sacrifice someone.
Right, but in true Yorgos fashion, this is said over a lunch in a very like flat sort of like, I'm sorry to tell you this, but these are the 3 steps that will kill your family. Like there's no heart behind it.
I love like Yorgos. Stephen is like, I need to get back to work. And Martin, who's played excellently by Barry Keoghan in this movie, he just kind of like is like, oh, okay. And he like kind of rushes it out as if like trying to keep it convenient for him. And then he's like, all right, any questions? Like it's like a sales meeting almost. Like he's just like, bureaucratically presenting this awful information.
Yeah, it's like he's mentioning like, oh, by the way, we're having a party this weekend. And it's like, bring dessert.
And that's...
And then immediately Colin Farrell has him taken out by security. But yeah, it's very... And then from there, yeah, the rest of the film is just like watching as Stephen's family succumbs to this strange...
curse, almost?
I say supernatural. It's never explicitly said it's supernatural, but it's kind of heavily implied.
Yeah. It ultimately... I mean, to me, I assume it's supernatural, not necessarily like a specific thing, but just like that this person has uttered the consequences and they're just going to happen no matter what the explanation is. And it's very compelling to watch. And I'm going to say a word that sounds emotional, but I have to emphasize that it's played in the most unemotional way possible. Stephen just like panicking, not literally, but like dealing with the situation for the rest of the film and just like stressing out about what he's going to do as the consequences just escalate. And it's very like, I don't know, this is where the odd unemotional tone starts to become less indicative of like something uncanny to me and more to just like profound depression, because it goes to this is a very dark scenario, and you just have these shots of Stephen just sitting naked and like in his chair or like weeping outside, and just like these numb, like horrified emotions. And it's very stressful.
Yeah, I guess one interpretation could be like they're people that are so depressed they just don't have anything left.
Yeah. And I mean, going back, so the title does come from a Euripides play about the goddess Diana whose sacred deer was killed by, I believe, Agamemnon, something like that. Yeah, and that he was meant to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia as a tribute. So you get the sense that it's like, it is a tragedy in like the very classical sense of the word, and that it's these people whose fates have been determined by like a godlike force, and they're just unable to react in a way that works for anybody.
Yes, I did want to bring up, and I noticed this I think a little more on the rewatch. Towards the end of the film, people are still stilted to an extent, but people kind of open up a bit. Some of the characters start to actually convey like real human emotions, and they're less stilted. Like, for instance, Colin Farrell breaking into tears. Like, he hasn't really shown any emotion other than maybe a little bit of anger before this. And this is just him flat out, like ugly crying outside his house.
Yeah.
And at the same time that happens, the camera stops being, because most of the shots have been very static up to this point. This is when I noticed there's one scene where the camera has sort of a handheld quality where it's not completely level. It's sort of shaking a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And while there aren't any other shots I noticed that were as like, steady, like, as steady cammed or as handheld, they speed up. Everything starts to speed up in terms of like how the camera moves. There's more movement.
Yeah.
The cuts are quicker. And it sort of coincides with everyone sort of slowly unraveling and being a little bit more emotional, which is why I think, the whole stilted thing might have been, it obviously was for a reason. One of the reasons I think is possibly so that when this ending, when everything starts to ramp down, it has more emotional weight.
Yeah, perhaps. That makes a lot of sense. I do want to talk about the cinematography a little bit because you mentioned it, and it is by, I'm going to butcher this name, Thimios Bakatakis. I think I got that right. But one of the interesting things that is quite noticeable in the film is the amount of headroom in a lot of these shots that these characters have. Like, it's the top of their head, and there's an enormous amount of space between them and the top of the frame. And it almost gives the sense of something hanging over them or their insignificance in the face of these events, along with just general more like, I guess, like Kubrickian style zooms and like slow tracking motions. But it really conveys this sense of, overall, in combination with the editing factors that you mentioned, this sense of like inevitability, I guess is the word I'm looking for. It's very...
Yes, I would agree with that. There is a very... It does, I didn't know it the first time, but knowing that this is... And it, by the way, it's very loosely based on this play from what I've read.
Yes.
Like, there's not really immediate analogs.
No.
Other than Stephen's supposed to be Agamemnon, and, he has to sacrifice his children. but it does sort of, in a weird way, play like a stage play.
I could see that. I mean, it's
just in terms of how I don't know how to describe how it reminds me of a play. Just something about the pacing and something about the dialogue, despite the fact that there's not that much emotion behind it, does seem like sort of like a Greek tragedy, like a classical
theatrical
play. And that might also explain the stilted quality of it. Like it's trying to be this very like we all have beautiful hair, Like,
no, I mean, it is. I mean, like, there obviously tragedy is a very broad word. But it isn't like it is a tragedy, and I would agree that it's theatrical. But it's not like Shakespearean tragedy where somebody has like a fatal flaw and they've been doomed by their own decisions. This is
No, I would say the fun thing is that no one really learns anything, do they?
No, and that's why it reminds me of those old, aside from the obvious basis in Greek theater. That's why it does really remind me of like almost like a mythological story where the characters are totally at the whim of the gods. And, it's not moralistic or anything. It's just punishment. You're right. Nobody does seem to learn anything or...
Like, no one is, I mean, I guess you could argue that at the end, and we had to get to this at some point, this film has a very shocking ending.
Yes.
It consists of Colin Farrell duct taping his family members because he can't decide who to kill. And he's realized at this point he has to kill one of his family members or they're all going to die. So he duct tapes them and covers their heads with, I believe, their pillowcases, puts a knit hat over his eyes and grabs a rifle and spins around in a circle and fires off shots randomly.
It's one of the most nail-biting scenes I've seen ever. And when I first saw this in a theater, I was just literally wincing and like I hesitate to say great, but the really suspenseful thing about it is because he misses a few times, so the gun goes off.
He misses, yeah. He doesn't actually hit one of his family members until the third shot, so puts it down, puts his hat down, he spins around, shoots.
It's like every time there's a shot...
lifts it up, he hasn't hit anyone. And it goes on for a while.
It's like a jolt, and it's just so... I also just love the like incredible surrealism of the image of him just spinning around. It's like this normal family, not normal, but should be a normal family in a normal house.
Yeah, it's like a regular family in a regular family home, and he's got a hat over his eyes, and he's spinning around with a rifle.
And they're all blinded, and it's just... And the thing to point out that we were just talking about is, and this is important, this is why it isn't like an educative or a pedagogic tragedy. It's an arbitrary choice. He does it because it has to happen, but he doesn't make a decision, He just... No,
he doesn't pick, I'm going to kill my wife or I'm going to kill it. No, he has to do it completely at random because he can't decide. He actually he is so torn, he goes to his children's school to talk to their principal. Like, which one has better scholastic aptitude? Okay, who is behaving better in class? And then he, like, just at the end, just very desperately is like, if you had to pick between one, who would you say is your favorite? And the principal says, well, I don't know that I could pick one. And he is clearly so angry because he's like, he just wants
to pick one.
Someone else to have to decide.
But he can't do that. He has to decide. And think about the way that all of... This is kind of darkly humorous, but it's more dark than humorous. The way all of his family members start to, like, kiss up to him in the second half of the movie.
I know, his son... And they're all, and another beautiful thing happens in terms of absurdity. His kids at least, start moving around without the use of their legs. So they're just kind of crawling around, and it goes to like crawling down the stairs and crawling down the street. And
yeah. Oh,
it's just really surreal to see.
When she's, when the daughter Kim is like slouching down the staircase like a snake, it's like, it's so creepy to me. It's skin crawling, but it's also, here's one of the funnier sequences to me. It happens preceding when he tells that story about masturbating his father, he is like furious about the situation and still in denial about it at this point. So he picks up his son and just basically tells him to walk and then just drops him on like the hospital floor, and he's like picking him up.
Yeah, he's like, you need to walk now, and he tries and he falls and he tries again. He just like drops his son, who clearly has no use of his legs.
He's like shaking him as if he's trying to get like a puppet to walk, and then he just drops, and it's like it looks painful.
I mean, it's something like out of Monty Python. It's like, it's that absurd.
But yeah, it's a very unique film, and he's a very unique filmmaker. One of the other kind of, I don't know, I want to talk a little bit about, and this is something that eludes me still, and it's something that Lanthimos obviously deliberately hasn't been entirely clear about. But what the film is trying to say, I find the scene early on where Nicole Kidman's character is about to have sex with Stephen, and she lies out on the bed like an etherized patient.
Yeah, like she asks him, general anesthetic, and he says yes. So you get the sense this is a regular occurrence. You get the sense that there are different levels of anesthetized he tells her to act like. And this time it's general anesthetic. And then it's like, that's clearly the only way he can perform. But I think if there's any reason for it, and if there were any kind of moral, which I hesitate to say this is even a moral, but if there was anything I took from the film, like there was a purpose. The scene at the end, so this big spoiler, he ends up killing his son. The person he ends up shooting is his son. And ironically, I believe he hits him in the heart, which I don't think I noticed on the first watch, but it's like, I'm pretty sure he shoots him through the heart.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
And there's all this heart imagery. He's a cardiologist. We get the open heart surgery. People are always talking about their hearts.
Yeah.
At one point, Martin goes and complains, my heart hurts and it's hereditary and my dad died from a heart thing. So there's all this talk about heart, and yet no one really seems to have much in the way of like a metaphorical heart in terms of, until the end, we see this family who haven't really been together all that much, other than, when they had to plan to kill each other, sitting in this diner, and it's the daughter and the husband and the wife, and Martin comes in. You get the sense that Martin told them to show up so he could know who they actually sacrificed. And they seem weirdly complacent. I mean, there's probably the relief like, oh my God, I don't have to kill any more of my kids, and this is finally over and done with. But they seem, in a weird way, the rest of the family seems almost happier than they have for the rest of the film. And I think if there was anything to take from the film, it's this weird kind of embracing of life. It's like all of these characters have lived this very anesthetized existence, in this like beautiful suburb where nothing happens, and it's like they're so boring. They're talking about their hair at dinner, and then this like very tragic event comes and shakes up their entire lives, and there's this huge tragedy. But at the end, they're happy to be alive. That's at least, and I think even that is giving maybe a little, it's sort of me putting my own interpretation on that, because they aren't like, they're not smiling from ear to ear. They're just eating at a diner.
Yeah, but they've never eaten so I hadn't thought about it that way, and I definitely, I mean, the thing about them being anesthetized, that's very insightful, because this is a movie that could be seen to have some sort of like, I don't know if it's a social statement necessarily, but like it is this kind of surreal, distorted picture of like a suburban American family. And I
think in that way, it's sort of like something like, say, the Stepford Wives.
Yeah, it could be.
Where it's critiquing suburban culture and the way it makes people anesthetized. It makes people so complacent that they become like so boring they're willing to become monsters.
Well, yeah, I think one of the lines, it was a very small, insignificant line, but one of the things that stuck out to me this time was when Martin's visiting their house and he's asked about where he lives. He says, I live in a not so nice house in a not so nice neighborhood. And I'm not saying there's like a class angle there or anything, but it does seem in some ways to be about like this kind of almost spiritual emptiness of this like kind of bourgeois, like upper class suburban family, and that I don't know if I'd say they're happier or necessarily closer by the end, but this circumstance has forced them into a reckoning with actual reality and with consequences and suffering in a way they may not have been. So I would say they undergo some sort of transformation.
I would say so too. And I think also, if there is any comparison between the Euripides play and the actual film, it might be because Stephen is supposed to be King Agamemnon.
Yeah.
So that might be, it's like his big suburban house is basically a palace or, a kingdom. And I believe the character of Martin is supposed to be, I'm blanking on what the term they would, basically a soothsayer.
An oracle.
It's supposed to be like a mystic.
Or a fury, like an avenging angel or something.
Or a fury, yes, something
but
like that.
I think, there is this line that stuck out to me. It's very subtle, but I think it had to be intentional. They're at Martin's house and they're watching Martin's favorite movie, which is, of course, Groundhog's Day. And
just another added little bit of absurdist spice.
Yeah, it's also like that scene where the daughter sings this like utterly wooden rendition of whatever pop song. But as they're watching it, at the very start of the scene, you hear a little bit of the movie, and I haven't seen Groundhog's Day in full, but there's this in the clip that's on the TV. You hear a character saying to Bill Murray, "You're not a god. You're not a god." And that might be the moral of, not the moral, well, perhaps the moral, in that Stephen has enough hubris to believe himself godlike, in that he's a surgeon. He wields literal power over life and death. You see him at these he delivers that keynote speech about how powerful the technology.
He has this really just typical surgeon joke about the first, open heart surgery was performed by da-da-da in Germany in 1854. And, that patient is still alive today, but sadly the doctor died in unfortunate circumstances. So it's one of the rare instances where the surgery was a success, but the doctor didn't make it. And it's just oh my God.
And the whole crowd.
Just completely making light of life and death.
And he talks about how revolutionary the technology is. And again, going back to those scenes, he wants to have sex with his wife as if she's an inert body, an object. And when he talks about, I noticed this is very subtle. When he brought up the menstruation thing at that party, I noticed Nicole Kidman, he kind of cut off Nicole Kidman's character, but Nicole Kidman's character winces a little bit almost, she just makes a little sharp motion. And I think it might be attacking, and again, obviously his most glaring crime is he believes himself so godlike, so above the rules of man, that he gets drunk while operating on a patient. But I think the film, if anything, might be a subtle attack on the hubris of this figure who, like King Agamemnon, he dares to defy the gods, to behave as if he's a god, and he's punished for it, and it gets tied up. I don't think this is a film particularly interested in a social statement, but it does get tied up.
No, and it's not necessarily interested in telling you a clear message either. We've both seen this now twice, and this is us struggling to kind of come up with what we think is the interpretation of this film. Yeah. But there are many interpretations of this film.
Yeah. I think about especially films from the 70s, some of which I haven't seen, I'll fully disclose, that weren't Marxist statements or anything, or maybe they were, I don't know, but attacks on a very specific type of bourgeois class, and it's this man who's affluent, who's male, who has the ideal suburban life, and you see this figure come up from underneath who punishes him for transgressing, and his whole insular existence is disrupted by it. So, I mean, there's a lot of possible interpretations, but I do think it is ultimately a film that isn't necessarily interested in the meaning or the theme of the circumstances so much as just what its characters, how their characters react or don't react.
I would agree with that. I wanted to mention Jack Ketchum has a short story, The Box, which reminded me a little bit of this film in terms of the supernatural afflictions that, the disease of paralysis and then not wanting to eat that the family members go through. Something similar happens in Jack Ketchum's story, The Box. It's a family on a train around Christmas, and one of the kids sees a stranger with a box, and he asks, "Can I see in the box what you're getting, your whoever for a present?" So the stranger agrees. Kid looks in the box, and then he just won't eat anymore. And no matter what they get him, his family tries to get him pizza. It's his favorite. And then they try just ice cream or sweets, and just nothing happens, and he starts wasting away. And then that kid whispers what he saw to his sister. And then she does the same thing. She stops eating.
Oof.
All the way to the mother, who is, one of them whispers what they saw. And all of them just slowly waste away and die. And the end of the story is the father is left, and he's goes on the train every day trying to find this stranger with the box so he can see what's in the box and be back with his family.
Yeah.
And it reminded me a lot of this film in terms of just this could be seen as a metaphorical affliction, just being just losing all power.
Yikes.
And the only person who is still around, who still has any power, is the father figure.
This inefficacious male authority. In both, I haven't read the story. It sounds really upsetting, so I must seek it out post haste.
It is very upsetting. It's one of the most upsetting stories I've ever read.
I am way behind on Jack Ketchum.
I mean, The Girl Next Door, and they made a good film adaptation. It's based on a real, I want to say the name was Sylvia Likens, a real case about abuse that happened. I can send you the information on it, and I might be getting the name wrong too. There was a great film called American Crime where they did it a more realistic interpretation that has I believe it's Ellen Page in it. Just horrific stuff where the neighbor would put cigarettes out on this teenage girl and then have her son and the other boys torture this kid. And it actually happened. Yeah, it's just to have anything surrounding it, whether it's The Girl Next Door, whether it's the film of Girl Next Door, whether it's the actual, just awful. I don't even remember where I was going. Jack Ketchum is the best. Yes. Okay. Anyway.
But yeah, no, I mean but Stephen is, he's been given all of the determining ability in this situation. But what fascinates me is that he still feels helpless. And if you look at the other family members, both the children and the wife, they're taking a much more active role in this situation because they're going to be the victims of it ultimately, while Stephen is largely in denial about it and just kind of stressing over it. And I find that dynamic very interesting, that the person who's most responsible is paralyzed emotionally, while the other...
it could also be seen as a metaphorical interpretation for something like the U.S. government or something like the patriarchy.
Yeah.
Where it's you have these people at the top that are just sort of, for whatever reason, not literally, but metaphorically paralyzed, and they're making decisions for children and for women, and they don't even know what they're doing. They kind of just want to ignore it. And at one point there's this great line Stephen has where it's Nicole, it's later on in the film. So it's his kids are both paralyzed and not eating, and his wife is worried she's going to be next. And he's eating something, and he says, "Oh, this is really good. I've been craving some mashed potato. If you could make mashed potato tomorrow, that would be great." And it's his family is literally dying dying around him. And he's just like, you know what would be good? Mashed potatoes.
And Nicole Kidman just flips out at that point. But
just flips out at him like, I'm going to die. Like, fuck you.
Yeah, but so that's the thing though, like these decisions are in his hands, but it's not of him they're of consequence to. It's everybody else who's actively suffering, and he's the one who has to truly make these like sweeping life and death decisions for other people. And that, I mean, like, again, I don't want to ascribe an overly political or social meaning to it, but it does have resonance with, you know, with be it like patriarchy or like a class system or what. It's a film you could, I feel like, and this is only one angle, but it's a film you could explore for ages and still never come to a full understanding of it necessarily.
And I think, yeah, I love those kinds of films. Obviously, we've covered a lot of those types of films already on the show, and we've only done, at this point, we're on episode 9, I think.
9-ish? Yeah.
We only have 6 available right now. I was going to say, and there's this very tenuous link, but there is one kind of playing devil's advocate. And I did this with No Country for Old Men, too. There is a scene where I hypothesized, like, maybe this could imply that this character is supernatural. There is a scene in this film, and it's very subtle, but the daughter is talking to the brother, saying, I'm so sorry that you have to die. Can I have your MP3 player when you die?
Yes.
And on first watch, you could think, well, she's just being cruel to try to like break this kid down so he just agrees to be the one who gets murdered. But there is another interpretation. It could be, and it's been established because there's a scene earlier where she's in the hospital and she gets a phone call from Martin. And he says, I'm outside. And she's able to stand and walk to the window and, you know, talk to him. And you get the sense they have this sort of psychic connection almost. Like he is able to make her stand just by talking to her. And they've had this relationship. They've been like falling in love.
As in love as any of these characters can possibly be.
Falling as in love as any of these people can, yes. And there's one interpretation where it's like she knew all along that she was going to live and that the brother was going to get killed, and that from the beginning she knew about this whole thing that was going to occur, and she is planning to just run off with that kid. Because at the end, too, one of the last shots we get as they're leaving the diner is the daughter staring at Martin and Martin staring back, and she does this very sly sort of micro smile. So, and I interpreted that as like they're still going to date despite all that's happened.
I would agree. I would say that, I mean, all of the family members exhibit their own degrees of awfulness and treachery. One of the toughest scenes to watch for me is when Nicole Kidman, after trying to have sex with Colin Farrell's character, is like, you know, I just think we should kill a child because we can have another child, or if you need an IUV. Like, it's just very bizarre.
It is, and it's simultaneously absurdist and just so dark. But yes,
yeah,
continue.
But yeah, but I mean, it is Kim, the daughter, who seems, one, to be the closest to Martin, obviously, but two, to be the most willing to like step on other people, basically. I mean, the most glaring example of that is when she literally tries to escape the situation by just crawling away on her knees. But yeah, I think at the end, you do get the sense that she especially hasn't been too torn up about the whole thing, because she is like, there is like a definite exchange of glances that occurs between her and Martin.
And there's a very interesting, these are very subtle and open to interpretation as well, but when they're all duct taped up, right, you don't get to really see the daughter's reaction. You don't really get to see the wife's reaction. You do see the son's reaction. He's like, you can tell he's screaming and shaking his head, no, no, no.
He's the one who's most...
And you could wonder, like, why is he, like, because, like, obviously they should all be scared, and yet he's the one that reacts the most.
Yeah.
And it could be because he's the youngest.
Yeah.
But there is an interpretation where it's like, the daughter knew. She said, look, you're going to die, sorry. And she somehow knew.
Yeah. And wasn't there a line, like, where she was like, I just know these things, or something like that?
Yeah, there's definitely a link between them, and even if this is a stretch, she definitely is in love with Martin, and you get the sense that they're going to keep going. There is an interpretation where she knew all this was going to happen all along. They've been hanging out, you know?
Yeah, they have. That is true. They do have a bond of some kind that I mean, like, yeah, it is accurate that at the end, as he's putting the pillowcases over their heads, Bob is the one who seems the most frightened. Where the wife seems kind of cold, and so does the daughter. So yeah, there's a definite, I don't know. And like, you know, Bob was also the first to fall sick.
It's an option. The thing is, yeah, by like saying specifically like this, like I'm not saying specifically this is what happened. I'm saying it's how I'm interpreting it. Yeah. And it's why I love films like this. It's like I can have a completely different interpretation than someone else, and you still enjoy the film just as much.
Yeah, and this is just a very subtle film too, and there are a lot of these types of undercurrents to pick up on. It's very symbolic, very abstract in its approach. There's like, I mean, again, like this, when he's eating his spaghetti, it should by all normal, for all intents and purposes, just be normal. It should just be him eating spaghetti.
But it's so tense.
There's this just weird vibe to like as if,
and it's completely absurd too. He's like, I was told that I eat spaghetti just like my father, and then he goes on to say what everyone's been thinking, like, although I found out later everyone eats spaghetti the same. It's like, yeah, you spin it with the fork. That's what everyone does.
Yeah, but it's also that Martin is both the cruelest, but also perhaps the most wounded character, in that you see in that moment a little glimpse of the pain he experienced, although the pain is obviously very obscured by this weird affect. But yeah, it's just like, I have to mention one of the more viscerally upsetting scenes that when I saw it in a theater, you know, there had been some laughs. It had been generally quiet, but this scene was eliciting total gasps. At one point, Stephen has kidnapped Martin and tied him up in the basement, and Martin explains his philosophy by first biting Stephen's arm very brutally, and then saying, you know, oh, I could apologize, but that wouldn't make you feel better, and I could, you know, stroke your wound, but that might make it feel worse, so there's only one thing that you can do. And he just, for like an extended shot, bites into his own arm and spits it.
He takes a huge chunk out of his own arm. Like, rips the flesh off like a dog.
And then, this is both hilarious and very dark. He's like over this, his mouth is full of blood, and he's spat out whatever chunk of like skin he tore off. And then he's just like, do you understand? It's a metaphor.
His blood is leaking out of his mouth, yeah.
I feel like that's almost a little nod from the director.
I feel like it's the director sort of having fun with himself. Just like this super visceral thing, and he's like, get it? It's a metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's what, I forget what review I read of it. I apologize in advance, but someone analogized that to what the film is doing. It's putting you through a deeply upsetting, harrowing experience, and then telling you, like, deadpan, it's a metaphor. And, like, it's just very...
Basically.
It's a great movie. I love this movie.
It's a great film. I did want to compare it to, and I know you haven't seen that much David Lynch, but Blue Velvet comes to mind, which is another similar, and I haven't seen the film in a while, but it's basically, a character in a sleepy suburb finds an ear, and then we go from there. Like he finds like a severed ear in the grass. But it's just like this seemingly idyllic suburban landscape that is overrun with these nefarious characters, but there is this weird vibe to it, this weird kind of stilted quality. And granted, people actually have emotions in Blue Velvet, but it's a similar sort of just very surreal, like open to interpretation type of film, and just very deeply odd but funny at times.
I again, another artist I'm way behind on is Lynch. I think Blue Velvet's on Prime, so I need to watch that post haste, but Yeah, very
It's not my favorite Lynch film. I think my favorite Lynch film is probably Lost Highway. But again, as stated, I'm like a hardcore, horror nerd, and that I would say that's one of his more horror-ish films.
yeah, I've seen the
Plus, it's got Patricia Arquette that I used to have a huge crush on. Anyway,
I've seen the one scene with that guy who calls his home or something, and he's in the house. It was very strange.
The Telephone Man, yes.
Yeah, he's great at moments like
I
that.
will say also, it's a revolutionary film, and it was one of the first ones where I learned Bill Pullman can actually act. I was like, wow, he can act. I think it was Bill Pullman's. Because, he was in like Independence Day before that, and you're like, I mean, he can sort of act, but he's gone on to do The Sinner, and he's like great in it. And you're like, oh no, he can actually act. Okay.
And speaking of actors, we've been using the word stilted and wooden and, all of that a lot. But I would like...
Oh, everyone does a brilliant... I would argue it's much harder to have the pathos when you're acting in this way. And Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman and the child actors and the actor who plays Martin, they all do a tremendous job.
Yeah. Martin, I thought, especially has... he conveys quite a lot, because he is, somewhat awkward and stammery, like a teenager would be, I guess, but he's, at the same time, and I know this was part of, Lanthimos' intent, but he's both like a fairly straightforward teenager in many ways, and this harbinger of divine justice and evil and all. It's very
and he embodies both types well. He simultaneously comes off as an awkward teenager and as this weird
total power
soothsayer, this weird mystic who communicates with the gods.
Yeah, he's very. There's a lot to appreciate here. I don't know if I would necessarily immediately recommend this it depends on the person.
Oh, I would say in terms of the order of films you should watch from Lanthimos,
not the one to start with.
I'd say probably start with The Favorite.
Yes.
Because that's, I think, the most accessible.
I agree.
Then probably The Lobster, and then this one. And he did Dogtooth, but I've heard Dogtooth is just so harsh. So probably do that last.
I have yet to see Dogtooth and his other...
I want to say it was called Dogtooth.
Yeah,
I think that's what it was.
It is Dogtooth. I haven't seen his Greek language films, which are Dogtooth and Alps.
Oh, that's true too. I'm not even mentioning the Greek language films. I think I started watching one of them and it was very odd. I can't remember which one it was now.
Dogtooth is the one about the parents who've raised their children in their house their entire lives, teaching them the outside is a very dark, scary place, and they have to just... I mean,
I believe so, yes.
He's very... every one of his movies in its own way is a little slice of hell, where these characters are trapped in pretty brutal, albeit darkly comic, circumstances. But this is easily, of the three that I've seen, and I do intend to see more, but of the three that I've seen, this is simultaneously the harshest, the most unconventional, the hardest to pin down to an actual specific genre, and the most obscure and alienating, because you can kind of pick up on what The Lobster is trying to say, and The Favorite...
Yeah, The Lobster is very weird, but it's fun in its way, It's it's people are dating, and if they don't get a date, they turn into an animal. So it's the stakes are already so absurd, it's not you have to kill your family. It's Colin Farrell needs a date.
Yeah. And there's a lot more humor.
And The Favorite, I love The Favorite so much. I would say that's probably my favorite of his... I didn't mean the pun, but that's probably my favorite of his films is The Favorite.
I really like The Favorite as well. I think we should talk about that one at some point, but we should definitely cover it at some point, yeah. That one is this very grim wit you see in these two movies. It's much more lively and fun in a lot of ways in The Favorite, because you have this trio of amazing actresses, and it's a vicious power struggle, and they're grappling with each other, and it's just It's much more
And yeah, Olivia Colman like won an Oscar for her performance.
justifiably. I forget. Oh God.
And she had such a great Oscar speech too. It was literally something along the lines of, "Huh, wow, who would have thought?" Like it's like she clearly is just like, "Huh,
Oh, Oscar.
okay,"
Yeah.
because she like 100% didn't think she was gonna win.
I thought it of the nominees that year. I thought it should have won Best Picture, but it went to Green Book, which is the worst thing.
Ugh, let's not ever cover that.
That like every time I think back, like Moonlight won for 2016, and The Shape of Water won, and what won in like 2018? What was the movie they decided? And I think Green Book, and I never actually believe myself. I have to look it up.
But you're like, it couldn't have been Green Book because Green Book wasn't very good.
But yeah, no, but off track. Yeah, start with the favorite. Go to The Lobster and do this because he is definitely a very specific taste, you know? He has a
I mean, I've already made the comparison, but David Lynch's films I think have a lot in common in terms of like when you're watching a Yorgos film, you know it. When you're watching a David Lynch film, like you know it.
Yeah, it's very idiosyncratic, and this film especially is not I mean, The Lobster has a lot of humor. I think this is more of a piece with The Lobster than with The Favorite, not just because Colin Farrell is in both films, but just the kind of like bizarre delivery and tone. But at The Lobster, and I rewatched it fairly recently, even The Lobster has a lot more like, I don't want to say whimsy, but comedy.
I mean, there's like life-affirming stuff in The Lobster. There's like, you know, you could see it as like everything sort of works out. That's one interpretation.
Yeah. But there's also just flat out almost like slapstick scenes in The Lobster to me.
Yeah, there's stuff with like a toaster, which is like
that's just
such a Yorgos thing where it's like it's like the punishment is someone has to have their hand like stuck into a toaster, and it's like that's just so simultaneously cartoonish and just dark.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, like we should just do Yorgos's films.
We should wait until we cover The Lobster.
But
there's just like there's a lot to take.
Yeah, but this film, while there is, I do maintain a lot of humor that I noticed much more on the second time when you're not as immediately...
Well, because you're not, like, the first time you watch this film, you're just so, like, reactive. You're just, like, in so much peril.
Yeah.
Because it's just so stressful. But the second time when you know what's happening, you can sort of see the humor more because you're not blinded by just the sheer terror.
Yeah, and it is, I mean... It is quite scary to me. It's one of the it's a low-key horror film, but it is a horror film, and it does, especially when he's spinning around. I mean, it gets under my skin. But more so than just being a horror film, it feels like a film that's not on your side, if that makes sense.
No, this film does not want you to be happy.
It's not just like, I mean, like I've seen other horror like Get Out. You know, it's scary, but it's a movie that's on your side. Even movies like The Witch have some sort of like take the view of the audience in a lot of ways.
There's a bit of catharsis, yeah, like at the end of The Witch, like you have this sort of sense of like of triumph, for lack of a better term. Yeah. I would compare this film, and I've mentioned it before, but I would say The Lighthouse has a lot in common with Killing of a Sacred Deer.
The Lighthouse definitely.
Where it's like it just isn't trying to make you happy, and there's not really a point.
Yeah. And I think the one I mean, just talking about good horror films, I think what I'm trying to, it's kind of similar to Hereditary in that it's really a film that's like a literal like punishing experience, and its instinct to just be upsetting and brutal is like borderline sadistic, like because it's just an unforgiving scenario. And that reminded me, I mean, Hereditary, like even Midsummer has catharsis, definite catharsis. Hereditary is just unremitting bleakness from start to finish, and nobody wins, and it's just...
But in similar fashion, Hereditary does have the absurdist slant to it, like, especially when there's like spoilers for Hereditary, but you should know this by now if you're listening to this, we spoil everything. There is a scene where there's a headless corpse floating into a treehouse, which is just like so simultaneously surrealist and also just like bleakly funny.
Yeah, there's a lot
I don't know if that was how it was supposed to be seen, but I was like stifling a laugh when I saw it in the theater.
There's more humor in Hereditary than people give it credit for, I think. But it is bleak humor. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like I've read interviews with Ari Aster where he said he was modeling it on like the Greek tragic mode because these are characters who their tragedy is not necessarily their choices, but they're just utter lack of control over the scenario. But yeah, I mean, this is a very unique film, and it is, I mean, it's not like you say A24 horror movies because they've garnered a reputation for horror at this point. But this is not...
I would say at this point in the game, like A24 puts out the best horror films. I want to say they did The Lodge too, but I might be wrong about that.
That's Neon.
That was Neon. I apologize. Neon has also been doing good work lately, but...
oh yeah, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, Parasite. But I mean, like, but A24 has... I mean, in my opinion, the crown for just good horror movies from a single studio.
Yeah, like, because, like, I mean, even going, like, they've gone back a while. I want to say that they did It Follows, right?
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
I want to say they did, but they've kind of had the indie horror game on lock for a while, what people would call elevated horror, which I hate that term. But
I hate that too.
But, like, let's say prestige horror, like... I prefer prestige horror because it doesn't imply that horror is this terrible genre that you need to elevate from. Prestige just implies it's good.
Yeah, or like art house.
Art house horror, yeah, something like that.
It's not implying superiority, just a different approach. But at any rate, even among those films, The Killing of a Sacred Deer is very different, I think. It's very different from like most films I've seen.
It's just, yeah, you can't, like, when you do a podcast about film analysis and you can't even tell your listeners, like, what genre this film is, it's like a severe mindfuck.
Yeah, the genre I would feel most comfortable placing this in is Yorgos Lanthimos, because whatever genre...
Yeah, he's like David Lynch. He just has his own genre.
And I that's not to underrate it as a horror film or as an absurdist comedy. But it is a film, I believe, that really could only have been made by him. And that puts it with like auteur cinema in some ways. But wrapping up at this point, I don't know if I should say to go watch it. But if this sounds like your thing, you gotta be in the right headspace. It's like Beast of No Nation. It's a great film. But you really, I don't know, you got to know yourself. Like, if you're someone that when you're having a bad day, you like to see really depressing stuff, then that, I'd say, watch Killing of a Sacred Deer. Yeah.
If you're one of those people that has to be in a really good mood to watch something really depressing, because otherwise it'll drag you down, do that. It's just like, don't go into this, like, expecting, like, a fun Saturday night movie, like, you can watch with your friends, because that's not what this is.
No. It's a film that it's about punishment, and that's what it feels like when you're watching it, punishment, but in a good way. It's a great movie, but in a good way, because it's very pretty to look at, and there are good performances, and there are very beautiful people in it. Yeah, they're all great. As my girlfriend said, and I don't know, whatever, I'll say it. She was like, it's so hard to be attracted to Colin Farrell because then he's in this movie. Yeah, that's fair. I would wholeheartedly recommend this movie if you enjoy being depressed or enjoy like unpleasant film going experiences, which I do. I do too. And that's why we make good co-hosts. So yeah, wrapping this up, this has been Celluloid Citizens. I'm Sean M. Thompson. I'm Brian O'Connell. And hopefully by the time this episode is out, we will have a Patreon. There's going to be mini episodes. There will be a mini episode on Midnight Gospel, and we're going from there to figure out what the next one's going to be. But until next time, enjoy your depressing Colin Farrell films where he acts like a weird sadist. There's nothing better.